right, good evening. So today we're going to talk about VerityBeyond and the cybersecurity use case with respect to how GRC works with identity and access management and this emerging domain called verifiable digital certificates. So in the beginning, identity was all about restricting and creating and provisioning access to services. However, as things have evolved and things have matured and things have gotten a lot more sophisticated, it's going beyond the identity layer. Identity is still the focus. However, we're seeing that the same processes that we use to certify identities, provision the identities, run the access reviews and certifications, that discipline is moving into the way we manage critical assets. Okay, so SailPoint is a vendor that specializes in identity and access management. Right. This is just a test instance of the app. Um, you can onboard identities through the application layer. So in this context, these are some test applications that I've onboarded primarily just for demonstrations. And then the idea is that you onboard the application and then you can bring in the identities and the accesses and then you can manage them for access reviews, certifications, etc., etc. Now the application is like the app that is used for a specific function. Now VerityBeyond, we've come out with an integration with both Identity IQ and the SaaS product, Identity Security Cloud. And we can now we have an integration that allows you to connect to an instance of SailPoint. Then you can bring in the applications as assets within VerityBeyond GRC, and then you can run business process reviews or business process specs for that particular application. More importantly, the use case that I'm seeing that is driving a lot of demand is they want to be able to bring online the assets associated with an application. So let's say you have an application, let's say it's an Azure SQL database, and you have multiple virtual machines, right, for that database. You can bring online the application. Let's say the application is inside SailPoint. The identities are managed by SailPoint, but now you have 10 Azure 10 is a big number, maybe 5 domain controllers, physical hardware, and then you do ad hoc performance reviews for these critical systems, right? So that's the use case. So the idea is that you tell VerityBeyond, so this is VerityBeyond on the right hand side and this is SailPoint on the left. You tell it what instance of SailPoint you want to connect to, the user ID and the password. If it's going to be Identity Security Cloud, you'll specify the API client ID and the API secret, and then the base URL for your ISC tenant. So we support both. Right now, it's fully tested with Identity IQ. Eventually, as time and opportunity open up, we'll have a much more mature version for Identity Security Cloud. But it's the same core engine in the background. So the applications are inside SailPoint. So all that the integration does is that it will pull in all the assets as all the applications as assets. So if you look at the Identity IQ, you'll see all the applications here, right? And then all of them are brought into the system. So we have an IBM. Let's say you have an IBM LDAP store, right? This is very common, or an AD instance. I set up just as a test application, right? It's on here. When you do the sync, you'll see the same application here. And now what you can do is that you can specify the assets that particular application owns. So it's going to onboard the application as an asset. And now if this particular application has other assets, you can link the assets together. So there's this interface called a linked asset. And here you can specify the asset that you want to bring online. So the way it works is that so the parent will be the IBM directory server, right? And then so let's specify a child asset. So let's say we have an Azure AD domain controller DC1. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna, and let's say it's for my own, you know, um, you know, demo test. All right. So specify this. So this is an asset. Now, what you'll see here is if we want to make this Azure domain controller a child, you'll specify the application. So all the applications are brought in as applications. So in VerityBeyond, you can make one asset to become a child of another. It's almost like a primary and secondary relationship. You have a primary asset and then you have these secondary assets that are grouped under it. It's a simple hierarchy. So I'm going to put this as secondary to this, right? And I'm going to onboard maybe like two. It's not uncommon to see a situation where I have multiple domain. So I'll call this domain controller 2. I'll make it, and then I'll have a third one, okay? A third asset. Domain controller 3. All right, and I'm making it. So this is just a relationship. So if you go back into the asset that we brought online for the IBM LDAP, right? So let's say you had some kind of relationship whereby, let's say your LDAP server had the core identities, and then you wanted to create some kind of relationship to say the AD syncs off of maybe an LDAP store, and then you want to kind of group them together so that you can kind of manage them together, right? So here, if you click on linked assets, see, so we go back to here, go to Azure. So those domain controllers. Okay, so we have to specify the parent. So here I'm going to specify that the parent application is at IBM LDAP, and I'll submit this, and I'll do that for all of them. DC2. So the parent is going to be the application that is of interest. All right. And then the third domain controller, sure, DC3. And then come here. Okay, so what we've done is we've onboarded 3 Azure AD domain controllers. We're building out a hierarchy relationship between an IBM LDAP data store and Azure AD, right? Okay, and then, so if we come back here, now you see the number has gone up to 4, right? So what this means is that we now have 4 assets that are linked to this parent IBM LDAP. So now once you have this, now you can begin to manage it. So we have this concept of cloud groups. So let's say some level of privileged users need to manage this. You can create a cloud group, add them on there, and then they will all see the IBM LDAP app, and they'll be able to manage it accordingly. Okay. So in the same way, you can go in. So I'll make this a delegate user, and then if we wanted to do the same thing for the Azure AD DCs, right? You can also specify this as to be managed by the same group. So that will mean that everybody in this DevOps group can manage all these assets in this subgroup, so to speak. Okay. So again, and so once you do that, you can kind of go back into the workflow, and now you can run your certifications or your. So one helpful use case is, so with this whole move to AI, we're seeing that many of these agents and tools, I call them complex services because that's really what they are. Some of them have chat abilities, analytics, data search, really cool, powerful capabilities. However, you still have to govern them, manage the hardware and the software and the assets that these intelligence services could procure or perhaps spin up, right? And from time to time, you need to commission them and also decommission them, right? So that's the use case. And another standard that we're seeing is with critical assets, it's important to be able to have what we call a verifiable digital credential, similar to an SSL certificate, but it holds information that really solves the problem of authorization, authentication, and attestation, right? So a vendor called IDEMIA, they specialize in these VDC certificates, right? They've got a whole infrastructure of apps and software that allows you to use different levels of authentication to prove a person's identity, to assert ownership, and then a VDC certificate is issued to that person, and they can manage it off their phone. So it's a much higher level of trust. So this could be a workflow that we use to issue a VDC, right? To say this person is the owner of it, they've been through the process, and this gives them ownership of this particular asset, right? So that's another use case that I think will certainly solve for the complexity that we're seeing with these intelligence services. How do you identify who owns what? How do you identify that this certificate belongs to this agent? How do you certify and validate that this asset belongs to this agent and it ultimately rolls back to this identity who has a VDC certificate, right? So these are the types of use cases that we're seeing that are bringing a lot of strong value to the cybersecurity domain, especially now that we're in this SaaS and cloud, push, and now we're seeing AI services come online with higher levels of, I guess, privilege, and tying all the assets back to key users, I think, is a key use case. So I'll bring this demo to an end. So we talked about SailPoint, we talked about bringing online assets from SailPoint as applications into VerityBeyond, and then we stood up a workflow for, again, this is just an example of how you could use a VDC or perhaps even an SSL certificate or any kind of certificate service from any vendor to associate these assets to a commissioning process and also a decommissioning process, and the life cycle of how you manage that asset throughout, and the approvals based on the level of risk that is necessary for your own use case. So these are the types of things that I think we probably need to think about as we adopt these more complex services to bring that level of trust and quality and safety to digital operations. All right, I'd like to keep my demo short. Thank you so much for your time today. You have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.